The world is still reeling from the sudden jarring loss of Hollywood legend Diane Keaton. But tonight, the narrative surrounding her death has violently shifted. Her son, Duke Keaton, has finally broken a week-long silence, stepping forward to expose a truth that was reportedly hidden. A truth that completely changes the official, public cause of death. What was initially announced as a tragic but relatively simple case of pneumonia now appears to be the devastating final chapter of a long, silent medical battle. Sources close to the Keaton investigation, speaking only on condition of anonymity, suggest that Duke's revelation, following the private funeral service, has blindsided the industry. The official death certificate, listing primary bacterial pneumonia as the sole cause, is now being scrutinized against a background of frantic family activity and medical rumors. The question isn't just how Diane died, but why her family initially chose to obscure the full complex picture of her final days. Was it an act of protection? Or was it an attempt to manage the legacy of a star who was fiercely private about her health? Stay with me, because we are breaking down the shocking new details revealed by her son, the medical findings that have left doctors baffled, and the subtle, heartbreaking clues from her final months that we all missed. The truth, it seems, is far more complicated and far more tragic than anyone was prepared to believe. For over 5 decades, Diane Keaton was the embodiment of the Hollywood outsider who became a timeless insider. From her Oscar-winning role in Annie Hall to her later career resurgence in Something's Got to Give, she projected an image of vibrant health, sharp intelligence, and unmistakable eccentric style. Even as she approached her 80s, she was constantly working, adopting a frenetic schedule that defied the typical image of a retired star. This vitality is precisely why her sudden death on October 11th sent such a violent shockwave across the globe. The initial statement from her adopted children, Duke and Dexter Keaton, was brief and almost clinical. Diane passed away peacefully from pneumonia, surrounded by her loved ones. The phrasing was designed to close the door on speculation, offering a concise and seemingly natural cause of death for a woman nearing 80. The industry mourned, tributes poured in, and the story seemed to end there. But for those who knew Diane, or who followed her career closely, the story felt incomplete. Pneumonia is a serious illness, particularly for the elderly, but for someone so active and apparently healthy, it felt like an abrupt, ill-fitting conclusion. There were no prior reports of long-term decline, no public acknowledgement of chronic issues, and no farewell note to her legion of fans. A deep, unsettling silence settled around the Keaton estate in Brentwood. That silence was not accidental. Insiders now claim the family had an implicit agreement to control the information, fearing a media circus that would overshadow her extraordinary career. They wanted a simple, dignified ending. However, the unexpected rush of tributes and worldwide outpouring of grief placed unbearable strain on her children, especially her son, Duke Keaton. Duke, the quieter and more private of her 2 children, had reportedly been his mother's primary caregiver in her final months. It was a role he took on in secret, a truth that makes his recent revelations even more powerful. To understand Duke's shocking statement, we need to look back at the 3 months leading up to October 11th. In hindsight, the subtle changes in Keaton's public life were not just quirks of an aging star, but the definitive signs of a body struggling against a relentless hidden enemy. By late spring, Keaton quietly began withdrawing from social and professional commitments. She canceled a highly anticipated appearance at a New York film festival, and her famously active Instagram account, known for its quirky posts and vibrant self-portraits, saw its activity drop dramatically. Friends and collaborators who reached out were met with short, evasive replies. A close associate from the film world, identified only as the producer, told a major outlet that by midsummer, you couldn't get her on the phone, and Diane always answered the phone. The official reason was always a break or reevaluating projects, but she sounded tired. Not just weary, but weak. There was an almost desperate tone to her voice, trying to reassure you everything was fine when you knew. Intuitively, it wasn't. The truth, as sources now reveal, is that Diane Keaton was battling a severe and aggressive form of myelodysplastic syndrome, or MDS, a group of blood cancers where the bone marrow fails to produce enough healthy blood cells. The condition leads to debilitating anemia, fatigue, and, most critically, a compromised immune system. Diane reportedly received the diagnosis more than a year ago, but shared the full extent of it only with her children and a long-time financial advisor. She refused aggressive treatment, fearing the public exposure and physical toll it would bring. For a woman who built her career on authenticity and vitality, she allegedly felt that the visible signs of chemotherapy would destroy her carefully maintained public image. Her greatest fear was becoming a tabloid headline about a celebrity health crisis. The family's carefully crafted narrative that she died simply of pneumonia began to crumble in the days following the funeral. The cremation took place quickly, as the initial family statement noted, an act often meant to finalize a private chapter. Yet an autopsy had been performed at the insistence of her personal physician, who was concerned about the rapid, systemic failure of her organs in the hospital. The results, as Duke Keaton finally revealed in a devastating statement, provided the missing piece of the puzzle. The official cause of death was pneumonia. That is technically true, but it is not the complete, heartbreaking truth. For over a year, my mother was fighting myelodysplastic syndrome. The pneumonia was not the illness that took her life. It was the final, overwhelming complication of a severe form of blood cancer that she refused to treat aggressively. She died because her body was unable to muster a defense against a common infection. Her bone marrow was failing. Her body had no army left to fight. Duke went on to describe the relentless fatigue that defined his mother's final months. He recounted the harrowing details of her hospital admission in early October, when doctors discovered her body struggling to produce even basic red blood cells. The bacterial pneumonia developed rapidly and found a completely defenseless host. The autopsy report, which Duke says he will now release publicly, confirms MDS as the significant underlying condition that made the infection fatal. The report details profound anemia and an almost total absence of healthy white blood cells, the body's defenders. The lung tissue showed an aggressive infection that a healthy body might have fought off, but which Diane's system could not withstand. Why did Duke choose this moment after the funeral to reveal such a deeply personal truth? His statement was not just medical clarification. It was an emotional release, heavy with the guilt of a son carrying a secret too painful to bear. In an exclusive interview given hours later, Duke spoke of his mother's intense fear of becoming an object of pity. "She made me promise," he explained, his voice reportedly strained. "She looked me in the eye and said, 'Duke, I do not want the last headline about me to be Diane Keaton's sick. I want it to be about a new project, a new photograph, or a funny moment. I will not have my life's end defined by illness.' We said pneumonia because that's what technically finished it. But it felt like a betrayal of her spirit to let the world think she just caught a bad cold and vanished." The pressure on Duke was immense. For months he had been her caregiver, watching a vibrant woman fade into frailty while maintaining the facade of normalcy. He arranged private doctor visits, screened calls, and worked with his sister to manage public statements. The secrecy his mother demanded ultimately became his emotional burden. His decision to speak out was driven by two motives: medical truth and personal relief. The initial report of simple pneumonia spurred a misleading public discussion. People dismissed her death as just a severe cold, which Duke felt was disrespectful to the true terminal nature of her condition. He wanted the public to know that his mother fought a genuine battle against cancer and that her death was not sudden, but the end of a long struggle she chose to face privately. The revelation has forced Hollywood to re-examine Diane Keaton's final public appearances and statements. Journalists are revisiting old footage, looking for signs that now seem obvious. The general reaction is a mixture of shock and understanding. Director Nancy Meyers, a longtime friend, expressed devastation, admitting that even those closest to Diane had no idea. "We knew she was slowing down," Meyers wrote in a statement. "We were told it was respiratory trouble. Knowing it was MDS changes everything. It puts her quiet strength in a new light. She was fighting a war and chose to fight it alone. Now, attention has turned to the secrecy itself. In an age of instant celebrity exposure, Diane Keaton's ability to hide a terminal illness for over a year is almost unprecedented. It reflects her unwavering commitment to privacy, a trait she valued more than public sympathy. It also exposes the stark contrast between her public persona, open, funny, chaotic, and her intensely guarded personal reality. In the aftermath of Duke's revelation, public reaction has been swift, emotional, and deeply divided. Many fans expressed heartbreak that the truth had been hidden, while others voiced admiration for Diane's choice to face her illness in silence. Social media has been flooded with messages of respect, with thousands of fans posting tributes under her old Instagram photos. The hashtag #ThankYouDianeKeaton began trending within hours of the news, as people shared clips of her most memorable performances and personal stories about how her films impacted their lives. Major entertainment outlets, which had initially reported her death as a simple medical tragedy, quickly began updating their coverage. News anchors spoke in hushed tones as they discussed the emotional weight of Duke's statement. Some pointed out how rare it is for a celebrity to control their narrative so completely, even in death. Others highlighted how her decision to conceal the illness shows the intense pressure Hollywood places on aging stars, especially women, to appear eternally youthful and flawless. Behind the scenes, Keaton's longtime colleagues have reportedly gathered in small private circles to process the loss. According to one industry insider, a private memorial event is being organized by several of her closest friends, including Al Pacino, with whom she shared an iconic and decades-long bond. Sources say Pacino was one of the few people who suspected something was wrong but respected her decision to stay silent. She was fiercely independent, he reportedly told a confidant. If Diane didn't want to talk about something, no one could make her. The revelation has also reignited conversations about the medical realities of myelodysplastic syndrome. Doctors and cancer foundations have stepped forward to explain how the disease progresses silently in many patients, often without visible symptoms until it's too late. Health experts have praised Duke Keaton for bringing attention to a condition that is frequently misunderstood or misdiagnosed. Some cancer organizations have even announced plans to honor Diane's memory by launching awareness campaigns in her name, focusing on early detection and patient support. Meanwhile, inside Hollywood's upper circles, Diane's death has sparked an uncomfortable conversation about the price of privacy. Many are questioning how a person so beloved could vanish behind closed doors without anyone noticing the depth of her suffering. Agents, publicists, and fellow actors are quietly reflecting on how the industry encourages secrecy, discouraging vulnerability out of fear it might diminish a star's marketability. In Diane's case, her silence was her shield, but it also became her prison. Close friends of the Keaton family have described Duke's emotional state in the wake of his public confession as fragile but relieved. For months, he lived in constant anxiety, protecting a secret that only grew heavier as media attention intensified. Now, with the truth out, he's reportedly found some comfort in the public's understanding. One family friend told reporters, "He feels he's finally done right by his mother. She didn't want sympathy, but she deserved truth. And now, the world knows what she endured." Diane's daughter, Dexter, has remained largely silent since her brother's statement, but those close to her say she fully supports his decision. Unlike her mother and brother, Dexter has lived a more private life, far from the spotlight. Insiders claim she was deeply affected by the months spent watching her mother fade. It was Dexter, according to reports, who helped coordinate medical care and emotional support behind the scenes, ensuring her mother's final days were filled with peace rather than fear. Since Duke's statement, a number of medical professionals have reviewed the autopsy findings, confirming that everything aligns with the description of advanced MDS. One physician noted that in cases like Diane's, even a minor respiratory infection can become fatal within days. This fact underscores how courageous she was to continue working and interacting with fans while battling such a severe illness. Her resilience, they say, was almost superhuman. Industry analysts now predict a renewed interest in Diane Keaton's filmography. Streaming platforms are already seeing spikes in viewership for Annie Hall, The Godfather Trilogy, and Something's Gotta Give. Critics suggest that audiences are revisiting her performances not just to celebrate her artistry, but to understand the strength behind them. There's a new emotional layer to her work, a sense of fragility hidden behind the laughter, now illuminated by hindsight. In a recent segment on a major news network, a cultural historian described Diane Keaton as a symbol of control in an uncontrollable world. She built her career by defining herself on her own terms, and even in her death, she maintained that control. Her silence wasn't deception, it was discipline. She refused to allow the media or illness to write her final chapter. Instead, she left behind a mystery that forced the world to look deeper, to ask questions about dignity, fame, and mortality. As the dust settles, one truth becomes undeniable. Diane Keaton's legacy is now greater than ever. She is remembered not just as an actress, but as a woman who lived and died on her own terms. Her story has become a reflection of something profoundly human. The right to choose privacy over publicity, strength over sympathy, and grace over spectacle. For millions around the world, that choice makes her not just a star, but a symbol of courage in the face of silence. In the weeks following the revelation, tributes have continued to pour in from across the entertainment world. Actors, directors, and producers have all spoken about Diane's immense influence on their work and her quiet mentorship behind the scenes. Emma Stone, who once called Diane her style icon and emotional compass, shared a heartfelt message, writing, "She showed me that strength doesn't have to be loud. It can be quiet, steady, and full of grace." Similar sentiments were echoed by Meryl Streep, who described Diane as a woman who could command a room without ever raising her voice. Outside Hollywood, ordinary people have also found themselves reflecting on the deeper message behind Diane Keaton's final act of privacy. For many, her story is a reminder that fame doesn't erase the human need for dignity. In an age where every detail of a celebrity's life is dissected for clicks and headlines, Diane's decision to protect her truth feels almost revolutionary. It challenges the culture of oversharing and reminds us that not everything sacred needs to be broadcast to the world. Medical ethicists have also weighed in on the case, emphasizing the importance of personal autonomy in end-of-life decisions. One prominent bioethicist stated, Diane Keaton's choice to withhold her diagnosis was not deception, it was self-determination. In a world obsessed with transparency, she chose sovereignty over her own story. That perspective has sparked a broader conversation about how society views illness, especially among public figures. It raises the question, do celebrities owe the public their vulnerability, or do they deserve the same privacy as anyone else? Meanwhile, several of Diane's unfinished projects remain in limbo. A posthumous documentary she had been quietly developing, reportedly focused on the concept of aging and reinvention, is now being reviewed by her estate. Insiders suggest that she left behind a series of recorded interviews and personal reflections that could shed more light on her mindset in her final year. Whether the family chooses to release it remains uncertain, but many believe it could become one of the most intimate and revealing portraits of her ever made. As for Duke and Dexter, those close to them say they are focusing on honoring their mother's final wishes. They have reportedly begun organizing a private foundation in her name, aimed at supporting cancer patients who choose to keep their treatments and struggles confidential. The foundation's mission, according to early reports, will be to provide home care and emotional resources to families facing similar battles, quietly, compassionately, and without public exposure. In the end, Diane Keaton's passing has left behind more than grief. It has left a lesson. A lesson about authenticity, control, and the power of silence in a world that constantly demands noise. She lived as an artist, loved as a mother, and died as a woman who stayed true to herself until her very last breath. The world may have lost an icon, but in revealing the truth of her hidden struggle, her son ensured that her legacy will no longer be remembered for how she died, but for the extraordinary dignity with which she lived. Medical experts and ethicists are debating whether the family had a moral obligation to disclose the full truth earlier. While the official cause of death on the certificate was technically accurate, the omission of her underlying illness has raised ethical questions. Most agree, however, that privacy, even in death, remains a personal right. Duke's revelation is not seen as a correction required by law, but as an emotional act of honesty and closure. With the full picture now visible, the subtle events of Diane Keaton's final year take on haunting meaning. Earlier this year, she released a personal photo book, a project now understood as her final artistic statement. At the time, she called it a passion project. In hindsight, it was her farewell message, a legacy she could control. Friends. Recall receiving late-night calls from her in August, just to reminisce or express gratitude. These calls, once puzzling, were her quiet goodbyes. Even her iconic hats, once a fashion signature, carried new significance. Duke explained. In the final months, she wore hats constantly, even indoors. It wasn't just style. As the MDS took hold, she became so anemic and cold that she was always trying to keep warm. The hat and layers of clothing masked the weakness spreading through her body. The narrative has completely shifted. Diane Keaton didn't simply die from pneumonia. She endured a hidden year-long battle with a terminal blood cancer and lost a fight she refused to let define her. Duke Keaton's raw, late revelation has provided not only medical clarity, but a deeper emotional understanding of her final journey. It reminds the world that even legends carry silent pain, and sometimes the greatest act of strength is facing it alone.